Welcome in and happy week 2 of the high school football season. You are tuned in live to the High School OT postgame show. Evan Moesta here from the High School OT studios here in Raleigh. Games are starting to go final. If you were tuned in to the High School OT Game of the Week presented by Alpaca Peruvian Chicken, that just went final. It was a marathon, but in the end, number 6, Providence Day, they were all over number 8, Rollsville tonight. The Chargers come away with a big 38-10 victory. Zaid Lott, the Syracuse commit quarterback for the Chargers, he runs for throws for 3 touchdowns, runs for another in the victory. J. Mike Blake, he's going to join us in just a little bit to break down all of that action as the Chargers never trailed and they come away with a really big victory. Not the biggest in the state, though. That belongs to the Mustangs of Myers Park High School. They come away with a huge upset tonight, 28-18 over number 4 ranked Weddington. A huge win for the Mustangs there. They got off to a really hot start last week with a big win in Charlotte kickoff night against Robinson. Joel Bryant had previewed them this week in his edition of the Huddle as a team that is really poised for a big year, and they certainly delivered tonight in that one. A huge victory for Myers Park, an upset win for the Mustangs over number 4 Weddington, who had honestly been rolling. They had a big win, a big top 10 win themselves last week. Weddington coming away with a huge one over Mooresville. Let's get to some final scores from around the area. We're going to have some guests on tonight's show as well. Let's start with some top 25 scores. Let's start actually in the top 10, and let's start with number 1, Grimsley. They earned a big 31-17 win from West Forsyth. And the big news there is Faison Brandon, the number 1 recruit in the nation, heading to Tennessee, did not play in this one. We're going to talk to Joel Bryant, who was at the game, get a little bit more of an update on Faison Brandon and why he missed tonight's game and what that timeline looks like for his recovery. But it did not matter for the Whirlies, as down the stretch they put the game on ice and won it 31-17 over West Forsyth. Number 2, West Charlotte, they had no problems with number 23 Monroe, 47-0. The Lions run away with that one. Another huge top 10 win. Huff, they continue to roll. The Huskies leave no doubt in a win over Independence tonight, 35-0. Yeah, you read that right. 35-0. Huff over Independence. A big one, an out-of-state battle. Cardinal Gibbons welcomes in Maury from Virginia. Maury, if you've looked at what they've accomplished over the last couple of years, they put up some gaudy numbers. That was nothing for the Crusaders. They persevere with a 24-20 victory tonight. We'll bring in Jordan Hadding, who was at that one covering it for High School OT. And as I mentioned, Providence Day, the big 38-10 win over Rollsville tonight in the High School OT Game of the Week. Number 7, Mallard Creek. They kick off tomorrow afternoon playing Warwick from Virginia. As I bring in Jordan Hadding now, we talk about these out-of-state wins and how North Carolina has been so dominant against teams from out of state. That remains true tonight as there's a big win for the Cardinal Gibbons Crusaders over Maury, bringing in Jordan Hadding now. Jordan, that was a thriller, and Cardinal Gibbons, they seemed up to the task.
Yeah, phenomenal game, back and forth. And in the end, Cardinal Gibbons stepped up. They had 3 second-half turnovers that I think was the difference in this game. All 2 interceptions for Drake Stone and a fumble recovery, so big game for him.
Yeah, so in this one, Jordan, you talked to Coach Wright after this one,
Yep.
and, you got to love the preparation going into a game like this. You hear all the noise about a team from out of state, all the athletes they have and all of that. How did Cardinal Gibbons kind of stick with it and keep the boat afloat, and then, they were able to kind of make the big plays when it mattered tonight?
Yeah, I think it was just committing to their game plan and knowing that they had prepared for this. And I think for that coaching staff, they were able to kind of draw off the experience of ending that Wake Forest streak a few years back. Obviously, none of those players were on that team. But I did talk to some of the players that said that was brought up. Like, nobody thought we were going to end that streak. So how about we go out there and end this Maury streak? And they successfully did that. It was a very strong showing by that defense. And then When they were down in the fourth quarter, Gannon Jones really stepped up and showed what he was made of, used his legs to move them down the field. And then once they got into the Commodores territory, that arm talent showed off with a beautiful touchdown pass.
Yeah, I think if there's one word to just sum up Gannon Jones, the Wake Forest commit quarterback for Cardinal Gibbons, just efficiency. Like he's
Yeah.
cool, he's calm under pressure, and the one thing that you love to see out of a high school quarterback, he's efficient and he just completes his passes.
Absolutely. I mean, just putting the ball in the right places. He hit a beautiful out route, and then the very next play was a fake reverse. He turns his back and immediately just fires the ball right over the middle, perfectly layered, drops it in the back of the end zone. So he was phenomenal. And then, like I said, that defense, not only Drake Stone, the defensive line was getting after it. They were able to get in the backfield. It was just overall really good team effort. And I think one of those games that Coach Wright talked about is invaluable. Win or lose, this is one of those games that it was a playoff-like atmosphere in August. You don't get that often. And to be able to have that tonight against a Maury team, that you don't know much about outside of you go and you look at Max Preps and you see they're beating teams 92-0. So you get your attention when you see that.
Yeah, Jordan Hadding joining us. He was out at Cardinal Gibbons and Maury from Virginia. Cardinal Gibbons coming away, the number 5 ranked Crusaders, a 24-20 win. You had mentioned Drake Stone having a big night for Cardinal Gibbons. There is some kind of added value in that, and some inspiration behind Stone. He told you after this game there was a lot of meaning to his shoes, right?
Yeah. So I get there, I'm on the sidelines, and I look down, and I'm like, now those are some shoes, and he has these nice all white Nikes, but they're bedazzled. I'm like, those are pretty cool. Next thing you know, Stone has a career game with 2 interceptions and a fumble recovery. He said somebody special made him for him, and he was lucky enough to get him on his feet tonight. And he said he thinks that they had a small impact on his performance.
I can imagine that a big performance for the Crusaders, and this definitely continues to elevate what is a really, really tough schedule. Coach Wright really challenging his team this year in the non-conference to prepare them for a big run in 7A. That is Jordan Hadding. Jordan, thanks for catching that game for us, and we'll see you soon.
Absolutely. Take it easy, Evan.
Again, that's Cardinal Gibbons, a 24-20 win over Virginia's Maury. Some more top scores from the top 25 rankings. Millbrook all over Heritage tonight. The number 9 ranked Wildcats, 36-0. Crest, a big win in a huge rivalry. That game just went final. Crest defeating Shelby, 31-24. Clayton, they picked up a big win, 49-14 tonight over Southern Nash. Hoggard, they were up big on Jack Britt, and then they had to hold off the Buccaneers at the end. The Vikings come away with a 44-40 win over Jack Britt. Ashbrook defeating Barry tonight with ease, 54-7, and then Mooresville defeating Sun Valley 49-14. Other top 25 scores from around the state. Watauga all over TC Robertson tonight, 42-0. Richmond and Scotland, that game just went final. Clay Best was down there in Rockingham for us. He's going to join us next. East Forsyth, big winners over Northern Guilford. That's a Northern Guilford team that was upset happy last week with a win over Reedsville. Southeast Raleigh, they defeat Dudley. Reagan, a thriller with Oak Grove. The number 21 Raiders, they're up 7-6. Oak Grove has a field goal for the win, but it's blocked, and Reagan comes away with the 7-6 victory. Charlotte Christian winners 16-7 over Charlotte Catholic. And then amongst other top 25 scores on Thursday, Tarboro all over Hunt thanks to a big first half. Cameron McDowell Moore and the Vikings coming away with a 34-17 win. I mentioned that Richmond Scotland game. Clay Best is now going to join us here. Clay, it was a flag fest, but in the end, the Raiders come away with the huge rivalry win. And for you, this is always a bucket list game to check off if you are a high school football fan, if you're a high school football media member, getting down there and experiencing the pageantry of Richmond and Scotland. What was it like, and what did it take for Richmond to come away with the win tonight?
Very interesting atmosphere for August. You think 2 teams like this, you think late October, November, still a very competitive Intense game back and forth for the first quarter and a half. It's 21-14 Richmond, kind of it's U.S. Open tennis time, kind of a on serve game up until that point. Scotland is starting to drive again, down 21-14, get a pass deflected at the line of scrimmage that goes 15, 20 yards downfield. Almost looked like a punt. I mean, it's kind of end over end. And Ty Covington, Richmond comes up, makes the interception, and it doesn't look like it's going to be a big return to start with, but all of a sudden the Raiders kind of flip that switch and they are into punt return mode almost, because that's what the ball looked like in the air. And lo and behold, it's returned about 35, 40 yards for a touchdown. They go for the 2-point conversion. After that, it's 29-14. Scotland comes back, drives down, gets inside about the 10-yard line with about a minute to go. And they're down 2 scores at that point, but you get the sense that this is going to be a huge fourth down attempt. Do you pick a field goal to make it 29-17? Or do you try to get the touchdown? And Coach Bailey and the Scots went for the touchdown. Richmond gets one of a few fourth down stops they got inside that red zone tonight to hold. It's 29-14. Richmond has its one miscue with a bad snap about midway of the fourth quarter that gave the Scots the ball at about the 10-yard line. But once again, the Raider defense comes up, stops them on fourth down, and it just kind of it was Richmond's night from there. Richmond seemed to be a very determined team after a close loss last week to Hoggard, a game they, of course, didn't want to lose, but they were happy to get a win tonight against anybody, but especially against Scotland.
Well, nothing beats Richmond and Scotland football. It's unique this year because they're not in the same conference. They're having to play this game in August opposed to a cold November night as it has been in the past. But Clay has all of that. He'll have a story up later tonight on High School OT and certainly another bucket list game checked off for Clay. Thanks for joining us tonight, Clay.
Yes, I must mention the total yardage and penalties as I have it. There are penalty fest, and then there is this. Richmond 248 yards of penalties, Scotland 100 yards of penalties. I don't have a total tally number on how many penalties were accepted, and it wasn't that would make it sound like it was a really sloppy game or a not a clean game. But yes, there were a lot of 15-yard penalties, but we had a few celebrations after scores and big plays penalties. Nothing wild, but things you can't do in high school. But just a really good officiating crew tonight that called what needed to be called and didn't let a rivalry game turn into things going anything getting out of line or that type thing. So a unique game all around is how we'll wrap it up.
Well, we appreciate you again, Clay. That is Clay Best. He was down in Rockingham tonight as Richmond picks up a big rivalry win over Scotland. As we mentioned at the top of the show, one of the biggest results of the night is Myers Park. They come away with a 28-18 win tonight over number 4 ranked Weddington, the Mustangs, one of the hottest teams over the first 2 weeks of the season. And we welcome in their head coach, Chris James. Coach, a big win tonight over the Weddington Warriors. Seeing that clock hit 0 and knowing that your guys executed on their game plan and were able to come away with a win, what is that feeling like as the head coach on the sideline?
I mean, obviously a great feeling. Kids put in a lot of work this week, really all summer to prepare, not just for tonight, but for the whole season. Obviously, Weddington's a state powerhouse. really respect Andy Capone and all that he does. A guy that has done that at a high level for a very long time. So I mean, obviously, a win like that is very, very special. Not just for the team, but the community. Didn't have a great year last year, and this senior class of 28 kids kind of vowed to kind of rewrite kind of the history of where we've been going over the last 3 to 4 years. So we'll enjoy it tonight. Like I told them last week, enjoy it for 24 hours. And after that, our focus is moving to Providence because it's a long season. But I mean, obviously, extremely happy for the guys and for the coaches in the community.
You mentioned those seniors taking what happened last year and making the most of it. 2-0 now to start the season. What was it during the offseason where they were really able to get in there and just make that commitment that we're going to turn things around and we're really going to show kind of the talent that's in this room and how it looks on the field?
I mean, I think it's something that we've been preaching for a while. A player-led team it has the ability to be really, really good, and you preach it, you preach it, you preach it, you preach it, and then finally, I think it clicks. And I think it clicked this summer. There's a lot of things over the last couple of years that this year I don't necessarily have to coach. I kind of let them control it. I let them kind of take control, if you will. Now, there's some things that we still kind of own, but for the most part. When you got a group of 28 seniors that have played a lot of football games, there's a lot of things that you just don't have to coach. They've been in some of these moments before. Even tonight, obviously Weddington's a really good team. We give up a super, super long drive to start the football game, but the message was like, all right, now we're ready to play. Bend, don't break. Find a way to finish when we get in the position to finish the football game. And I think, maybe even my first year as head coach, I think that's one of the things that we struggled with was learning how to finish just because our guys had never been in some of those positions before. But I think now, we're seasoned as a group and we've kind of been in some of these scenarios before that maybe didn't come out the way we wanted to last year. But I think this year, like I said, it's the seniors taking control over it. And, I've told them before, as go them, will go the rest of our team.
You mentioned it's a long season and, being able to turn the page for next week. How do you take these first 2 weeks, the big win in week 1 at Charlotte kickoff night and then the big win tonight? How do you take that confidence and that momentum and use it as a good thing that can help you over the next couple of weeks?
I mean, it's simple. We were 4-6 last year. Lost a lot of close games. One of our talking points this offseason, our conference, as the conference goes, the games that we lost, it was one possession games. Most of the games we lost in conference, we had the ball last. So, obviously you're excited to win. Everybody likes to win. You're excited to win your first two, obviously 2 big wins to start the season. But our sights are a little bit bigger than just winning the first 2. We just literally driving back to the school tonight, just talking about being able to take it, 1 week at a time. Again, but I'm also not going to take these moments away from these kids because last year was tough. It was really tough. They worked really hard and the ball didn't bounce our way. Had some injuries and things of that nature that happened. So you can't take these kind of moments for granted. Weddington's a state power. Everybody, when you talk high school football in North Carolina, Weddington is probably one of the first names that comes up. So, I want my kids to be proud and excited. Like nobody gave them a chance. Nobody truly believes in them just because of kind of what we did last year, and that's fine. And we like it that way. I don't want people to talk about us. I want to enjoy this win, but we'll be back to work tomorrow. And then we'll game plan for Providence, and we'll be back in practice on Monday. So it's kind of the same message.
Well, a big win tonight for your team, Coach. Congratulations on the victory. Enjoy it tonight. And best of luck as your season rolls along. That's the head coach of the Myers Park Mustangs, Chris James. Thanks, Coach.
Thanks so much for having me.
We keep things moving. Let's head over to Durham County into the Bull City. A big showdown tonight between Southern and Jordan, 2 traditional powerhouses in Durham County who do not face off as often as they should. But tonight, Jordan definitely settled a huge win over Southern Durham as we welcome in Jonas Pope IV. Jonas, a big win tonight for Jordan, and they really mashed their foot on the gas, and it felt like they never looked back after initially taking the lead.
Yeah, they fell behind 7-0, and then they scored 30 unanswered. I joked they went on a 30-0 run. Just being patient and just doing it, becoming two-dimensional. You know, they didn't rely on just to run or rely on just to pass. They did very well at both. They may have found a new star in their running back in Hayes, who sat behind Blue for the last couple of years, but now he's had back-to-back 100-yard games to start the season. And then Melton kind of picking up where he left off. I think, you know, he threw 2 touchdown passes, but was spreading the ball all around to a bunch of different receivers. And then defensively, just what they did was just kind of, they talk about one dimension. They made Southern Durham one-dimensional. Southern Durham really didn't have a lot going in the pass game consistently. And then that means Jordan just kind of shut down the running game and tried to force them to be a passing team. It just wasn't working for them tonight. You know, Jordan just a solid contest all the way around.
What really was the turning point there? As you mentioned, 30 straight from Jordan. Was it just a matter of getting their feet wet in the contest? Obviously, in a big rivalry game, you know, it takes a while to kind of sort it out and, you know, land your punches. And it felt like once the Falcons were able to do that, they kind of took off. Was that kind of where things turned around, or was there a certain play that stuck out to you?
Yeah, it led to a Jordan touchdown. Then they scored. Then they had what almost was another turnover. The receiver, the punt returner muffed the punt. It looked like he muffed the punt, and it looked like Jordan recovered it in the end zone for a touchdown. But the officials ruled it a touchback. So it was Jordan's ball, and Jordan went 80 yards to score to tie the game at 7. And it's like a light went off. They were rolling the rest of the way. Antonio King, the head coach, said what they needed from week 1 to week 2 was to actually get a game out the way. He said that was the biggest adjustment, biggest improvement, because they played last week, scored 22 and win over Leesville Road. But he said having that game under their belt, being able to make mistakes last week, they were able to build off of this week. And they looked like they steamrolled, man. Once they tied that game at 7, it was you blinked and then it was 17-7, and it was 23 to 7 before you knew it, and then 30 to 7. And it just kept rolling. Before you know, it was out of control, almost by halftime, in the favor of Jordan.
As you had mentioned, a close game last week in week 1. Jordan started the year in our top 25 and got a scare from Leesville Road. It took a late field goal for the Falcons to win that one, but now they're 2-0. For Southern Durham, on the Southern Durham side, there's been a lot of questions about their play at quarterback. Jonathan Dillon had been getting a handful of the snaps last week against Wake Forest. Obviously, Tyson Broadway had been the starter the last couple of years. What was that quarterback by committee? What did it look like tonight? Obviously, the Spartans, there's no denying that Dillon is, a fantastic playmaker. Did they lean on him more in this game, especially when they got down?
So it's funny you mentioned it, because so early in the game, Dillon was playing receiver, and so they threw a ball to him. It kind of came up a little short. I thought he could have caught it, but it was a little short. The previous quarterback he had missed some passes, but he hit some passes too. So then they put Dillon at quarterback, and he immediately breaks out for a big run, which you expect with an athlete like that. But he really wasn't connecting on a lot of his passes downfield, so they put the other quarterback back in. They kind of went back and forth, and then they kind of settled on Dillon because of his athleticism and his ability to make plays with his legs. In the second half, he rushed for like an 80-yard score, what looked like a score, but was called back for a holding. So you could see on that play why they want the ball in his hands. It's hard to get him to him at receiver sometimes, but you give him at quarterback, he touches every play and can take off and make something happen. So yeah, it was kind of a back and forth in the first half. They kind of settled on him in the second half, but at that point they were already down. They were down, 23-7, and they were one-dimensional. So everyone knew they was going to drop back and try to throw the ball. And I don't think he's a natural quarterback. He's a natural playmaker, natural athlete back there, but not really a pocket passer quarterback. So that kind of made them one-dimensional, already being down 23-7. He showed some flashes again with his legs, but I personally thought he should have stayed a receiver, and they could have given the other quarterback more chance to get the ball in his hands that way. But, that's why I write about it and don't coach it. So that's the decision they went, and that's we saw what the result was tonight.
Well, that is Jonas Pope, who has been blessed and highly favored with press boxes over the first 2 weeks of the season. I was joking today in the office, we got to find somewhere for you to go next week that is not as nice as Durham County Memorial Stadium and Bank of America Stadium. You're 2 for 2 so far, but a thriller tonight in the Bull City as Jordan picks up a big win over Southern Durham. Thanks, Jonas.
Appreciate it.
All right, let's take a look at some scores from around the 919 area code tonight. As we roll on here on the High School OT postgame show. As we mentioned, Jordan picking up the big win over Southern Durham, 30-7. Cleveland big winners over Corinth Holders tonight. The Rams, their offense just keeps on rolling. The graduation last year of Jackson Bird, they had a couple receivers graduate and transfer out. It's been no problem for Scott Riley's team, 52-13 over Corinth Holders tonight. Leesville Road was up on Wake Forest at last check. Middle Creek picking up a big win over Willow Spring. Garner, they go down to Laney. They had some bus problems that caused that game to be delayed, but the Trojans did not have an issue once on the field. 42-7 winners. Eastern Wayne over CB Aycock, 18-3. Princeton and East Duplin picking up the win over Princeton. We do not have a final score yet from that Hillside Panther Creek game. If you do have that final score reported on highschoolot.com, we will get that up in just a moment. South Garner picking up a big win over Southern Lee. Enloe all over Nightdale tonight. Apex Friendship, they pull away a big early lead for the Patriots, allows them to defeat Lee County 31-14. And then Sanderson, leaving no doubt the Spartans now 2-0 under Coach Jeremy Buck this season, 63-10 over Riverside, and a really cool halftime ceremony there as they honored Aleem McNeil, the former Spartan, the former NC State Wolfpack star, and the current member of the Detroit Lions. He had his number retired. We're going to stick in the 919, and we are going to welcome in Randy Capps. Randy Capps from Joco Sports tonight. Randy, how was your Friday night, and what exciting matchups were you able to catch?
I caught a little bit of Clayton and Southern Nash. I wanted to get a little look at the Comets, and they look pretty solid. It was a close game at halftime, 14-7. Southern Nash doing a good job kind of shortening the game and actually scored right there late in the second quarter to get within 7. But the second half, it became, physics and basic size and depth, a larger 7A school, really sort of taking the toll in numbers and just sheer talent. I mean, Clayton just keeps coming at you with power 4 player after power 4 player, and it just kind of wears on folks. And the Comets really sort of picked up steam. And a little side note, Coach Scott Chadwick's 200th career victory tonight for the Comets. So congratulations to him and a big win for those folks over on the blue side of Clayton, if you will.
What kind of confidence does Clayton have this year? Obviously, it feels like all of the right puzzle pieces are starting to fall in place for them. And there's this window this year. We mentioned what Cleveland's been able to do the last couple of weeks, but there was this thought coming into the season that if there was ever a time for Clayton to kind of break through that curse with Cleveland, it was going to be this year. How does this start to the season, and how does tonight's performance against Southern Nash maybe give them some confidence as they continue to roll on through the first month of their season?
I was talking to my buddy Wesley Outland, the play-by-play voice of the Comets, and I asked him the same question. I was like, "Hey, is this the year? Do you guys feel it?" And he really does. And talking to Coach Chadwick, he's confident as well. Of course, he's going to tell you, we're going to take it one game at a time. Our next opponent is the one we think about. But there's probably a calendar somewhere in the football office with October 31st circled on it. And
I can imagine
the Comets would like to get a shot at Cleveland. And look, I mean, the pieces are there. They've got talent. They've got coaching. They're hungry. They certainly look the part. They're in as good a position as they've been in since I've been covering Johnston County football to finally kind of get over that hump and make a deep run, not only past Cleveland, but even deeper into the playoffs than that. And it should be a fascinating season. But look, the Rams aren't going to give it to them. I mean, it's going to be, those two teams battling it out. And of course, Southeast Raleigh might have something to say about that. Gardner might have something to say about that. I mean, that's a good league with a lot of good teams. And both of those teams will have to be leery not to get picked off before that Halloween matchup.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the fun things amongst all of the crazy realignment across the state this year. For the most part, the integrity of the Greater Neuse River Conference was kept in place. And this is a really strong year for that league. As you mentioned, Southeast Raleigh, Garner, Cleveland, you just go across the board, just tons of talent when it comes to football on Friday nights in the Greater Neuse. Last part for Clayton here. We're starting to get our first looks at Aiden Smalls now that he has the weight off of his shoulders of being committed. How does that look now? Do you see a lot more calm and collected Aiden Smalls now that not only does he have that commitment to NC State out of the way, he knows what he's going to do at the next level, but on top of it, he now has a full year under Scott Chadwick now under his belt. How does he look maybe compared to what you saw a year ago?
I think you just hit on it. Year 2 in the system, another year away of being primarily a wide receiver as he was at Cardinal Gibbons, and really getting comfortable at the quarterback position. And look, Scott Chadwick's resume at developing quarterbacks speaks for itself. Obviously, the more time a young man has under the tutelage of Coach Chadwick, learning the system, learning the mechanics, all right, 5-step drops, 3-step drops, all right, get back, throw the ball, read this key, read that key. And I think the important thing about him is he's every bit as good as he was last year, but he might not have the individual rushing numbers because he won't need to. He's got more weapons on the outside. Parker Ferguson, D'Angelo Ruffin, healthy running backs this year, which was not a thing for most of the year last year for Clayton. River Fiore, probably going to App State as a tight end, just weapons everywhere you look. He doesn't have to be the guy every down as he did for long stretches last year. And I think that'll make a big difference, particularly as we get later into the season.
Well, that is Randy Capps from JoCo now. Clayton picking up a big win over Southern Nash. Appreciate you, Randy.
Absolutely. Have a good one, man.
All right, let's now go around and take some looks out in the western part of the state as we take a look at our 8-2-8 scoreboard. AC Reynolds, a big win over Maiden. That was back and forth. And then at the very end, the Rockets escape with a 27-26 win. Hendersonville all over West Henderson tonight. 39-6. Hickory, they shook off last week's heartbreaking loss to South Point in a big way. They win 63-14 over Alexander Central. A thriller between Irwin and Mountain Heritage. The Cougars 30-15 winners over Irwin. Heard County from Georgia beats up on Murphy 42-10. Dobbins Bennett from Tennessee, they pick up a big win over Asheville, but East Rutherford, they get a win over Blacksburg from South Carolina 41-6. We move on here in the 8-2-8 scoreboard. An exciting one between St. Stephen's and Bunker Hill. That was a little exciting, and then at the end, St. Stephen's was able to pull away 39-20. Franklin all over Robbinsville 28-7. Freedom's electric offense continues to roll 61-0 over Drawn. West Caldwell, one of the longest losing streaks in the state. It has been snapped. A big win for West Caldwell, 26-20 over Avery County tonight. And then High Brighton picking up a huge win over South Caldwell. And that's where we welcome in Jeff Lincoln, David Jones from Scoreboard Radio. Guys, we talked a little bit about High Brighton last week, but this offense under Elon Lipford, they look like the real deal.
It was the real deal. It was our first chance to see High Brighton this year, and last week they scratched out a 24-21 victory over a good East Wilkes team. South Caldwell put up 62 points last week against West Caldwell, and our question was going into this game tonight, which one of these teams is the real team, a team putting up a blowout win or scratching out a close win? Turned out it was High Brighton. This game was 21-20 in double overtime last year. Nothing like that this year. Elon Lipford, by my stats, 10 for 11, 194 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, no picks. He tacked on 3 rushing touchdowns, and Jeff and I were talking in the postgame show. Really didn't see a bad decision all night long. Break down the film, maybe. He looked over one open receiver for another, but I thought soup to nuts. This was one of the better quarterback games we've seen in a long time in the Catawba Valley, and Elon Lipford looks like the real deal.
Yeah, Lipford, he's kind of been all over the place in his high school career. Started at West Caldwell, went down to Independence, played a year as the backup there, and now he's back up with High Brighton and doing really well in that one. Take a look at some of the scores that we had across the 8-2-8 area. There were some big finals. Obviously, West Caldwell getting that win there to snap that streak. That was a game against Avery County that we kind of thought was anybody's game, and a good win there for West Caldwell. Another one that I didn't mention in our scoreboard, but somebody needs to cool down Ford right now. Another win. That's 2-0 on the season for Ford, and that goes back to last year when they got that big win over West Iredell. Any big final scores that stand out to you guys from across the area?
Yeah, again, Fritty Ford picking up that win over East Burke tonight, now 2-0 on the season. And that's what we were talking about with West Caldwell. I thought it was a pivotal game for West Caldwell tonight. They've got 23 kids on their roster. We saw them last week. We knew they had the skill position. It was just the offensive and defensive line depth that they didn't have. but I felt like they needed to get the win tonight because this could spur them on. They've got some winnable games on their schedule. Mountain Island Charters next week. You've got Drone out there. You've got East Burke. You've got Patton. I felt like if West Caldwell could get that win tonight, it may keep that locker room together. Tony Pyland will have something on Monday that he can look at and really start focusing on and rally the troops with. If they would have lost tonight, I'm afraid it would have been another 0 season for West Caldwell. But follow the same blueprint that Fred T. Ford is following. Fred T. Ford got that win at the end of the season last year. The momentum carried over into the off-season workouts, the summer program, and now here they are at 2-0. So I'm not saying West Caldwell is going to go out and make the playoffs or win the conference or anything like that, but they were very impressive tonight. I thought it was a good bounce-back win for the Hickory High Red Tornadoes tonight, taking out Alexander Central with ease. Joe Glass lost his father earlier this week, so it may have been one of the win-one for the Gipper type games tonight for Hickory, but a good bounce-back for them. That game, you mentioned the score of the Maiden and AC Reynolds game. We had a friend of ours, one of our stringers, Lance Pruitt, was at that game. Maiden scored to make it 26-27, went for two, didn't get it with 53 seconds to go. They actually recovered the onside kick, had a chance to win, but the Hail Mary at the end felt incomplete. But a big win for AC Reynolds. They get back on the winning track. And St. Stephen's, I thought that was an impressive win tonight for the Indians over Bunker Hill. We'll see next week St. Stephen's and High Brighton. Just how good is St. Stephen's? Have they made the improvements this year against what is turning out to be a very good High Brighton team as well? So a lot of good things going on in the 828, but you're right. Freedom, they're on a roll. Who can stop them? Well, maybe that team up in the mountains with Taga. No problems tonight with TC Roberson, 42-0. Maddox Green. We don't even remember who that kid was from last year. So that's going to be the first game of the conference slate. I believe that's the first week in October. That's probably going to decide the Northwestern 3A, 4A Conference Championship week 1, because I think those two teams are heads and shoulders above everybody else in that conference.
Yeah, you mentioned Watauga. They welcome in Mount Airy next week. That's going to be a really big matchup there for the Pioneers. But also 63 from Hickory tonight, 61 from Freedom tonight. Two of the biggest scoring outputs across the state of North Carolina. You mentioned High Brighton and St. Stephen's next week. Is that where we can catch you?
No, we're going to go over. We've not been into Burke County yet to cover the Burke County teams. We're going to go over and catch Drone. Drone starting off slow. Lost last week to Bunker Hill. Took it on the chin tonight from Freedom, and they're 0-2. They're going to be facing another team from our area that's starting to get some momentum, and that's Wilkes Central. Wilkes Central had the big come-from-behind win over North Iredale last week, kind of forced North Iredale's coach to resign after that game. And so the Wilkes Central, who Chuck Cannon, their head coach, was the head coach here at High Brighton. He'll take Wilkes Central over to Valdez. First meeting between those two teams, so we'll get our first look at Drone, see if Chris Powell can get the team. He said coming into the season it was going to be a rebuilding year. We'll see how much improvement that they can make. We knew they were going to have their hands full against Freedom tonight, but probably, even though Wilkes Central is good, probably a little bit more of a better opponent for Drone next week. So we'll see Drone and Wilkes Central next week from Valdez.
A little bit of history here tonight. Jeff was tracking this. High Brighton coach Sam Mackey moves into third place on the all-time wins list here in Lower Creek tonight, and this was the most points. This was the 50th meeting between South Caldwell and High Brighton. Tonight, 62 points. Most points by any team in this series, not the greatest margin of victory. Back in 2016, High Brighton won a 61-0 shutout in the build-up to that 2017 2AA state championship. But recapping here, High Brighton's Elon Lipford looked very impressive at quarterback. This High Brighton team that changed completely on offense and defense looks really good through two games, and got a good opponent in Newton Conover next week. For South Caldwell, doesn't get any easier. They head up to Waynesville to take on Tuscola. So South Caldwell trying to figure out which team they are, the team that blows out a county rival or gets blown out by a county rival. So long week ahead for Casey Justice and the guys in Sawmills.
Well, we appreciate you guys as always. You had mentioned Maiden. It came to mind as you were talking about how that transpired in that close game with AC Reynolds. They've had two really, really close battles over the first 2 weeks with Lincolnton and AC Reynolds coming away with one win and one loss there. But Jeff Lincoln, David Jones, Scoreboard Radio, we really appreciate you guys and hope to have you again next week.
Thanks, Evan. Looking forward to it.
Go Hokies.
Let's go. All right, now let's take a look at scores from across the 910 area. Terry Sanford, they had the big win last week over Pine Forest 42-7, or they had the big win over 71st last week. They get a big win tonight, 42-7 over Pine Forest. 71st, they bounced back in a nice way with a 22-8 win over Cape Fear. James Moore from the Fayetteville Observer was over at that one. East Duplin, who we mentioned earlier, 42-20 win over Princeton. Jacksonville, a big win over Northside, 48-27. St. Paul shutting out Lumberton tonight, 35-0. Pinecrest picking up a slim victory over Union Pines. First win of the year for the Patriots, 21-16. West Brunswick defeats Whiteville, 38-21. North Brunswick over South Brunswick, 39-21 tonight. Kinston, a barn burner with Wallace Rose Hill. The Vikings escape 26-24 winners. Midway all over Clinton, 55-39. Still looking for a West Columbus, South Columbus score. If you have that, submit that into HighSchoolOT.com. The report scores right there on the homepage. And then White Oak over Richlands, 34-21. I mentioned that 71st Cape Fear score, 22-8. The Falcons picking up the win. James Moore now joins us from the Fayetteville Observer. How did that one go down, and how good of a win was that for the Falcons after last week's heartbreak to get one under their belt?
Yeah, after last week, I think 71st really needed this win just to kind of uphold the culture that they have, the standard that they have, that Coach McLaurin really puts in those guys and put in those guys for the last umpteen years. But it was a very impressive win. I was very impressed with Ramani Watson, the transfer quarterback from West Mecklenburg. I think he really stepped in and really showed great senior leadership, managing the football well. Second half was flawless from the 71st offense. The defense kind of showed up all night. They kept Cape Fear from scoring offensively all night. The offense had a few issues early on. They had three lost fumbles in that first half, but they got things together in the second half, and I think they'll be fine. The same thing Coach McLaurin told me after the game. They'll be fine.
Yeah, and I think the big thing last week after that loss that they suffered to Terry Sanford, we were talking about, had that onside kick not been recovered at the end of that game, and if Terry Sanford doesn't march downfield and kick that field goal to win it, the whole story around 71st is how Jason Franklin just completely took over and owned week one of the football season. 5 rushing touchdowns. How valuable is his presence to this 71st team as they're in this position right now where they have a really interesting mix of experience and youth?
Jason Franklin's value is extreme for 71st. I want to say he is probably one of the few guys on this team, him and maybe 2 others, that's played every single game over the last 3 years that they have gone far in. The last couple of years when they went to the state championship, he's been a part of that team, and he's been a 1,000-yard rusher on both of those teams. So being that he's a senior leader, he's the captain this year, he's number one. I think having him healthy and having him producing each and every game at a high level is very crucial for their team and especially the offense. And everything else will follow, I believe.
I mentioned some of those scores from around the area. Terry Sanford has a big win over Pine Forest tonight amongst them. Anything really stand out to you as you've had a chance to kind of download some of the final scores from around the area?
Well, speaking of that Terry Sanford score, Jacob Moore is the real deal, and he is emerging as one of the best quarterbacks in this region. And man, he is on fire. 239 yards through the air, and that's huge. But what really stood out to me tonight was the Jack Britt and Hoggart game. I like the fact that Hoggart beat Richmond last year, a conference foe from Jack Britt this year, and now coming to beat Jack Britt in Fayetteville. I think that's huge, especially in the last few seconds. I think that's really huge for Hoggart, and I think Jack Britt, who has the toughest schedule in Fayetteville, I believe that's a good tester for them as well going into conference play. Being that, like I said, Hoggart beat Richmond last week, and now they have everything. They have the tools. They know exactly what they need to do over there at Jack Britt. Coach Randolph has put together a great program over the years, so I believe they'll bounce back and they'll find their way. But I think this is a really good thing for them in that loss. I think it's a blessing in disguise.
Well, again, a close one there, and they definitely showed some fight at the end. Hoggart was up big, and then all of a sudden, Jack Britt closed that gap down to 44-40 in that one. James Moore from the Fayetteville Observer, we thank you for joining us. Anything to look out for this upcoming week? Now that we're truly waist deep into the fall sports season.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to some good volleyball. We have Grays Creek. They took a couple losses over the last week or so, but they lost to really great teams. So we'll see how they do coming up as conference start to kick off.
Well, that again, James Moore, Fayetteville Reserve. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Evan.
All right, let's go back to some top 25 scores. We mentioned at the top of the show, Grimsley without the services of quarterback Faison Brandon. It ended up not being an issue tonight in a top 11 matchup as they take down West Forsyth 31-17. Joel Bryant was at that game for us. Joel, before we get into the results and how the Whirlies were able to come away with the victory, there was a lot of speculation this morning and throughout the day about the status of Brandon and how long he might be out for and all of that. What did you find out tonight about Faison Brandon?
Yeah, so there was a rumor going around that he had broken his thumb on his throwing hand, which obviously would not be good for a quarterback. So I had to go out there and find out what the deal was. I show up. He's not dressed out. Coach Brown tells me that there's a ligament issue in his hand, but it's not something that's too serious. They don't think it's going to be detrimental long term. And obviously, they were confident in their backup quarterback, who was a freshman, which we'll get into. And turns out they're right to be confident. But yeah, so for any Tennessee fans or Grimsley fans that might be worried about Faison Brandon long term, I didn't get the impression that it's going to be a problem this whole season. Might be a couple more weeks, but we'll see.
Well, if you are a high school OT insider and you were reading some of the watch lists and you're reading the huddle before the season and looking at some freshmen to look out for, there were a few names on that list of players who may not have an impact this season, but are some class of 2030 guys that you, or class of 2029 guys that you really got to look out for. And on that list was a certain quarterback at Grimsley who I don't think we had the intention of talking about him in week 2. Certainly not picking up top 15 wins in the state. Tell me more about the next in line here who is filled in for Faison Brandon.
So Brody Lowe is a left-handed quarterback, and I put him on the watch list, as a future name because obviously he wasn't going to play this year with Faison Brandon being their number 1 quarterback in the country. He's calling the action in week 2, and he doesn't look like a freshman out there, and doesn't look like he's in any way phased by playing the number 11 team in the state. He comes out. Grimsley goes up 14-0 this game. He hit some nice passes to Cayenne Battle. Lears really nice passes to Caden Cato. He was very poised for a freshman, and it's a big spot for him. All the pressure's on him. He's got to carry this number 1 team in the state against a really good opponent. Frankly, it's going to be a strong non-conference schedule for him to deal with, and he was impressive. He didn't panic. West Forsyth is a very good defensive front, and they got after him a little bit, but you never saw him freak out. He stepped up into the pocket, rolled left to his good side, and made some nice throws tonight. He was very impressive, and generally speaking, the Grimsley offensive line very, very good. They paid the way in the running game, which is what was needed tonight. Ty Shoemaker, the sophomore running back, he busted off a 65-yard touchdown to give Grimsley the final lead change of the game. Grimsley's offensive line is really, really good. They have a transfer from West Stokes named Jackson Sammons, who was a really good player for West Stokes. He's now Grimsley's left guard. He opens up a big hole in that Ty Shoemaker run. Shoemaker kind of slithers his way through, patient, finds the right hole, and takes off for the 65-yard touchdown. Grimsley, it's just a machine at this point. We talk about it every year. They seem to be losing all these 4-star players. Now they're without a 5-star quarterback. It doesn't matter. The team is just so good, so well coached. They're very, very, very hard to stop. I think it would take, at this point, I'm starting to think it's going to take like multiple devastating injuries to beat this team.
Yeah, and something that ended up working in Grimsley's favor was this summer, obviously with Faison Brandon's recruitment and his involvement just, constantly playing year-round, and he took some time off this summer on some of their trips to go play 7-on-7s, and we saw Grimsley over at UNC playing in theirs, and yep, that was what I was going to lead to. It wasn't Faison playing all these top teams, and Grimsley performed really well with Brody Lowe there. And again, at the time, we thought like, wow, really impressive freshman quarterback. Can't wait to talk about him next year. And here we are on August 29th of his freshman year. and now he has the keys to what is the number 1 ranked team in the state of North Carolina. Joel Bryant out at West Forsyth tonight as Grimsley prevails 31-17 winners. Thanks again, Joel. So now we roll on here on the High School OT post-game show. The High School OT Game of the Week presented by Alpaca Peruvian Chicken. It was a marathon, but in the end, a top 10 battle goes the way of Providence Day. And that's where we welcome in J. Mike Blake. He was on the call tonight as Providence Day and Zaid Lot never trailed in a huge victory over Rollsville. J. Mike, it felt like Providence Day was in control from start to finish.
Yeah, and they take a 7-3 lead or a 7-0 lead, then a 7-3, then it's 10-7. You're thinking, oh man, this is a good game. 21 points in the second quarter just explode. All of a sudden, it's 31-3, and they never look back. Coach Chad Greer and quarterback Zaid Lot after the game are both like, we won in week 1, but we were not happy with how we won. Zaid Lot was like, I didn't throw a touchdown pass. And I looked at my stats and I'm like, I can do better than this. And Coach Chad Greer was like, we were banged up. And we had guys who are coming into this game, we were banged up. And we had guys who, looked at the missed tackles and things like that in week 1. And he said, we can do better than this. And they came out and they absolutely proved it. The defense was lights out. There was nowhere for Rollsville to go with downfield passing. Everything was kept in front of them. Also, there are some injuries on the offensive line for Providence Day. One big one, Leo Delaney picked up another injury in this game. It's not looking. I don't want to say he's out for the rest of the year, but it re-aggravated a shoulder, which is not good. He's a senior committed to Clemson, but what coach and quarterback both said is we learned that our backups, because they were already without another starter at offensive line. So at one point in this game, they were missing 3 starters. They still controlled the line of scrimmage against a pretty good talented Rollsville team. They're like, we learned a lot about our team tonight, and they're settling in. Providence Day is settling into what they can be. They have 2 more games against athletic association teams or high school athletic association teams with Charlotte Catholic and Butler, and then they kick off independent schools. And they need that offensive line to play well if they're going to beat Rayboone Gap out of Georgia and win the independent school championship, because everything you hear about Rayboone Gap is how big that line is. So, it was interesting. There wasn't like a game breaker. There wasn't the 50-yard breakaway pass play and big run that gashed the Rollsville defense. A lot of it was field position. They won the kicking game because they had 2 made field goals that were negated by a Rollsville penalty, and they turned them into 7 points both times. They had great punts. So Rollsville, touchbacks on their kickoffs. Rollsville's starting field position was always pretty much the 20, and Providence Day would start around the 45. And it's very hard to win when you have equal teams and there's that much of a difference in the special teams game and the average kind of line of scrimmage. So it's a great all-around game in all facets. They just were smart. They were just, hey, run to the sticks, turn around, and the ball will be there on a crucial, second and long or a third down pickup. And it was really death by 1,000 cuts. I mean, Rollsville didn't help itself with some injuries. Feel bad for Davis Brown, the big tight end for Rollsville. He took a really bad one. That added to why this game took so long. We had a lot of penalties. We had a lot of conferences. We had a lot of cramping. Yeah. And then Davis Brown's injury took a long time. He had to be carted off with a lower leg injury. But Rollsville walking wounded at this game. This is not why they lost. They fell behind before all these injuries happened. But Davis Brown out. You had Griffin Haynes with Xavier Griffin Haynes with a lot of cramping late. It's probably the best I've seen him play. Amir Brown has to leave the game after he comes up limping. And Gavin Waddell dealt with cramps all night. He had a great game, but he was more of a possession receiver for Rollsville. So again, Providence Day feeling really good. It's hard to win a game. I think with high school boys, they're going to be like, hey, we won. What's the problem? But Providence Day didn't have that attitude going into this game. They're like, we know we can play a lot better than we did last week. We're not happy with just the win. and it paid off tonight in a dominating win in the top 10 game. In Rolesville, now you're 0-2, and you're going to Richmond next week. Like 0-3 is staring you in the face. They've got to figure some stuff out. A lot of times they went too east-west in the run game, and then it wasn't like, oh, that's where the play was designed. It's just guys kind of like not really settling in yet on offense. I thought the defense played well enough. They were costly penalties, yes, but they didn't give up the big one, and they had to deal with short fields most of the night. But again, Richmond's next week, and that's it for Rolesville non-conference because they're in one of the few 8-team conferences amongst the bigger schools.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Let's rewind to last winter. Rolesville makes its way to the state title game, but its path to that game had to be spent on the road because of its RPI, which featured teams last year like I believe it was East Wake or Athens Drive possibly. Yep. And that kind of put them in a hole where they had to have their postseason journey be exclusively on the road. So now, how do you look at Rolesville's schedule, knowing what we know now, that conference seeding does not matter for the playoffs? It's RPI, it's straight RPI. Obviously, the team is uber talented. There are a few teams in the state of North Carolina that has more talent than the Rams do. So, yeah, you have to believe if you're Coach Rackley, you're going to go out there and you're going to, especially after what the schedule was last year, you're going to go find the best teams out there. And they did. You find Mallard Creek, you find Richmond, you find Providence Day. If you get 3 games to schedule in the non-conference, he didn't miss on any of those 3. But now you're sitting here staring 0-3 potentially in the face. What does this look like for the Rams? Because once you get into conference play, yeah, there's going to be some wins there that you're going to be able to pick up against maybe, Broughton's or Wakefields, who haven't been as dominant powerhouses over the last couple of years. But you also look at Leesville Road, who's been putting together a strong early start to their season. Millbrook, who's rolled through their first 2 weeks of the season. Do you feel like the Rams are potentially already behind the ball more than they should be?
Yeah, the thing is interesting and is we knew that, you'd have a drop off after losing Braden Atkinson as a quarterback. Let's face it. We've seen him play lights out for a number of years, just criminally underrated as far as deep ball accuracy. With his team now is trying to find its identity on offense because Caleb Williams is a different quarterback. He's a better runner. It's still like getting comfortable with the pocket because the pocket will collapse on him, and then he's hurrying these throws and trying to figure out who's open. Providence Day just had a defensive had a secondary that was able to keep everyone in front of them, and not a lot of teams have that, but the teams that matter do, and Millbrook is one of those. So you're looking at they play Richmond. Then they have a bye week. Then it's Corinth Holders. Then it's Millbrook. So that bye week has to be just like that is everything, I think, for them. No matter what happens next week, they have to fine tune some things in that bye week and come into conference play as a different team offensively because they can't keep falling behind like this. They fell behind against Mallard Creek 22-0. They fell behind 31-3. And they were, they took a long drive with a lot of Providence Day penalties to get into the end zone right before the end of the half. That's what it's going to take. It's going to take Caleb Williams kind of settling down and being like, this is how I run the offense. It's not like Braden Atkinson. I'm a different quarterback. This is how we do it. And being comfortable in that pocket. When you play a great team with a great rush, you have to know kind of what's your safety valve. And I think Davis Brown is losing him. He was a great safety valve when he caught the pass. It was it was right over the middle screen pass. He kind of turns and he's such a big target that the only way you can bring him down is trying to go for don't hit him high, right? Don't arm tackle. But it went for the legs, and unfortunately they're going to need another safety valve for Caleb Williams. It's tough. I think honestly, having seen Millbrook in Jamboree, and I know Jamboree football is a little bit different. Rolesville is kind of playing from behind in its own conference right now until they can figure some things out. The thing is, like, I wouldn't be surprised if you see the defense just get more ball hawkish. Like they're going to have to start setting up their own team into some short field situations. They were unable to do that tonight. That did not force a turnover. Providence Day did that once. They kind of tipped the ball at the line of scrimmage. The defensive lineman, who we could not see the number, he catches it and corrals it to himself, and they have the ball on the 4-yard line. Roseville needs those plays. They need the defense to start to shift into a ball hawk defense that's forcing turnovers instead of just being a really athletic team that's kind of hard to match up with across the field. I think that, to me, that's like how I envision them kind of riding the ship.
Well, again, Providence Day, big winners tonight in a top 10 matchup on the High School OT Game of the Week, presented by Alpaca Peruvian Chicken, 38-10. Zaid Lott, 4 touchdowns for the Chargers in this one. Mike, next week, you're heading down to Johnston County. Northern Nash is on the road at Cleveland. That should be an exciting one against 2 programs that are always dominant in their respective areas. Again, the High School OT Live Game of the Week next Friday night. You can catch it live with Mike Blake on HighSchoolOT.com, presented by Alpaca Peruvian Chicken. Mike, we thank you for joining us, and get some sleep, man. That was a long one, man.
2 weeks in a row. 2 weeks in a row with a game that's cutting into the post-game show start time. And this was not a 46-44 final either. So yeah, well, and then now we're going to Cleveland, who is notorious for having like the last game to finish on a Friday night. What are we doing, Evan? What are we doing?
I will say this as a caveat. If you've earlier in the show, I was making mention to it, but Cleveland is just picking up right where its offense has always been. They've been really dominant even without Jackson Bird and company over there, and under Scott Riley. Another big win for Cleveland today over Corinth Holders. They had a massive victory last week over Pinecrest. Yeah. So their high-octane offense will be on display next week on the High School OT Game of the Week. Thanks, Mike.
No problem. Have a good night.
We mentioned Providence Day and picking up their big win. Other top scores from around the 704 area. Palisades, a huge win over Olympic, 26-0. East Lincoln was up on Providence at last check. Butler coming back to defeat Corvian 14-9. 2-0 now under tenure number 2 for head coach Brian Hales. South Mecklenburg 16-13 over the Community School of Davidson. Lake Norman all over Mount Tabor tonight, 48-28. Kings Mountain eking out a 40-34 thriller against Burns. Salisbury, another thriller there, 40-36 against North Rowan. Northwest Cabarrus and Central Cabarrus, they were tied up all night long, and in the end, the Trojans come away with the 27-21 rivalry win. We don't have a score yet from Chambers Hopewell. If you have that, you can go on to highschoolot.com and report that score. Statesville winners over West Meck 26-6. Marvin Ridge, they beat Ballantyne 38-12. And then arguably the thriller in the 704 tonight, East Rowan over Pine Lake Prep 19-13 in overtime. The Mustangs get the go-ahead score, and then their defense stands tall and defeats Pine Lake Prep. Again, top 25 scores from around the state. Grimsley, big winners over West Forsyth. We just had Joel Bryant on to talk about that result. Big winners, West Charlotte shaking off an overtime loss to Grimsley from last week in the Carolina Panthers Keep Pounding Classic. The Lions all over number 23 Monroe tonight. That one is a 47-0 final. A huge one there for the Lions. Huff, talking about big wins, 35-0 over Independence. That is not a typo. Number 3 Huff, 35-0 over number 10 Independence. Cardinal Gibbons defeating Maury from Virginia, 24-20. The number 5 ranked Crusaders, a huge out-of-state victory for them on their home field. If you missed it at the top of the show, we had Jordan Hadding on to break that one down. Providence Day beating Rollsville, as we just talked to Mike Blake about. Rolling on with some other final scores, Millbrook and Heritage. We were talking about the Wildcats and what their future might hold given where Rollsville's at right now. 36-0 over the Huskies. Crest defeating Shelby 31-24 in another one of those unique rivalry games. Again, with the way realignment has been this year, some of these rivalry games that we're used to seeing late in the season are having to be moved up now to August. 31-24 Crest over Shelby. We're going to get to it in just a moment, but Richmond had a win over Scotland. Clay Best was there for that one. Clayton picking up the big win over Southern Nash. Randy Capps earlier in the show helped break that one down. Hoggard over Jack Britt. The Vikings, they were up big late in this game, and then the Buccaneers, they fought all the way back to make it interesting. 44-40 the final score there. Ashbrook winning big over Berry Academy 54-7. Mooresville all over Sun Valley 49-14. Watauga beating up on TC Robertson 42-0. That Richmond Scotland score, as I mentioned, 36-21, a penalty fest out in Rockingham, but the Raiders come away with the big victory over their rivals. East Forsyth beats Northern Guilford tonight 33-10. Southeast Raleigh a win over Dudley 31-6. Reagan a thriller where they block a late field goal to defeat Oak Grove 7-6. Charlotte Christian picking up a win over Charlotte Catholic. That one was 16-7. And then we take a look at a score that went final on Thursday night. Tarboro defeating Hunt 34-17. Number 25 ranked Brevard. The Blue Devils, who slipped into the top 25 rankings this week, they are on a bye. Let's talk about some more scores from around the state. Let's head to the 3-3-6 where Page pulls away for a big win over Northwest Guilford. Northeast Guilford and Eastern Alamance, that game was rolling down the stretch and it was a close one at 13-7. That has since gone final. The final score is on HighSchoolOT.com right now. Reedsville, a huge bounce back for their first win of the season. If you missed it last week, Northern Guilford came back from down 9 points in the fourth quarter to stun the Rams. But now in week 2, Reedsville picks up a 42-14 win over George Washington from Virginia. We mentioned that Southeast Raleigh Dudley score. Mount Airy, a big win over East Wilkes, a good one for the Granite Bears ahead of their matchup next week against Watauga. Southeast Alamance defeating Seaforth 41-12. Walkertown all over Parkland 50-16. We're still looking for a score from that Eastern Randolph-Randleman game. If somebody sends that in through the report scores tool on HighSchoolOT.com, we'll get that one up there in just a moment. Lake Norman defeating Mount Tabor. Davie County over West Rowan, a nice bounce back there for Davie County after a loss to West Forsyth last week. Western Alamance, they defeat Southwest Guilford 42-13. And then North Davidson all over Lexington 17-14. As we roll down the stretch here, another big upset across the state. Myers Park defeating Weddington. The number 4 Warriors go down. Earlier in the show, Chris James, the head coach of Myers Park, talked about how their 4-6 season last year was not up to standard, but their seniors were able to bounce back in a big way. They had a big week 1 win over J.M. Robinson, and then tonight they come through with a huge victory, 28-18. The Myers Park defense stepped up in a big way to help defeat Weddington in that one. Other scores, let's head out to the 252. D.H. Conley, a big win over Northeastern tonight, 34-19. Leica Beebe was there for High School OT. He will have those highlights and a story from that one. We mentioned that Clayton Southern Nash score. New Bern all over Havelock, 28-7. Still looking for a final from that Wilson Prep West Craven game. Green Central 60-0. They left no doubt against Goldsboro. South Central 26-16 over Farmville. A thriller down between Kinston and Wallace Rose Hill, 26-24. That final score, Aiden Grifton beats North Pitt 33-8. Northampton County over Perquimans 18-7. A barn burner. Holmes and North Johnston. It's North Johnston who escapes 35-34 over John A. Holmes. North Lenore in a rivalry battle with South Lenore comes away with a 20-6 win. And then Southwest Edgecombe 42-7 over Hertford County. That'll do it here in the in week 2 of the high school football season. You have been tuned in to the High School OT post-game show. Again, head over to the High School OT statewide scoreboard for all of the final scores from across the state of North Carolina. Stories are already up as well from some of the top games that we had on this show. Jonas Pope out in Durham as Jordan defeated Southern. And then J. Mike Blake, he had the Providence Day big victory over Rollsville. As I mentioned, Clay Best was out at Richmond for that game against Scotland. That story should be getting up on High School OT soon. Joel Bryant and company out at West Forsyth. Lots of content coming from the big Grimsley win tonight and much more. For the High School OT staff, I'm Evan Moesta. Happy week 2 of football season. We will see you next Friday night.